Hey, everybody. It is Wednesday, May 8th. You're listening to the mo.news podcast. I'm mo.news.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Jill, forgive the echo in this room today. We were moving about the WeWork, and I'm in a glass-enclosed booth.
I was going to ask you if you were recording this from the bathroom. And I was hoping the answer was no.
Slightly more appropriate. No, I'm in a conference room full of glass.
Okay, so Moshe, my favorite video of the day, you explaining on the premium feed the current beef between Drake and Kendrick Lamar. It was a bit of a reprieve for Middle Eastern politics and some of the heavier stuff that we cover.
I mean, listen, we talk every day about the beef between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. We talk every day about the beef between Hamas and Israel. Why not talk a little Drake, a little Kendrick Lamar over on the mo.news Premium Instagram account? I appreciate those who are asking those types of questions. It led me to go deep. And Jill, this beef goes deep between Kendrick and Drake, touched off most recently by a Drake song with J. Cole, Kendrick saying, "You're not worthy of me." It goes back and forth. But now things have escalated as the line goes from Anchorman. That escalated quickly because now a security guard has been shot outside of Drake's home on Tuesday in Toronto. It's unclear whether it's connected, but certainly a coincidence at least.
All right. Another reason to sign up for Premium. If this is a story that you are interested in, Moshe really does break it all down over on the Premium account. For now, though, let's get to some headlines. Stormy Daniels takes the stand in Donald Trump's hush money trial in New York City. What she had to say and why the judge denied Trump's request for a mistrial. TikTok, meanwhile, is suing to challenge that law that's forcing a sale or a ban of the company in the United States. To the Middle East, Israel takes control of Gaza's vital Rafah crossing. The U.S. says this is not a full-scale invasion. Also, what we are learning about that ceasefire hostage deal that Hamas said it agreed to, but that Israel said that it hadn't even seen. We'll have some info on that. Meanwhile, despite the nonstop images on social media and the news, a new survey shows that college students aren't that concerned about the Middle East. So what issues are they interested in? Plus, the Boy Scouts of America is changing its name, and Panera says it is now phasing out its controversial charged lemonade. And Miss USA resigns from the title. We'll tell you why. And Moshe has on this day in history.
Jill, some history for the annual Westminster Dog Show and the beginning of pizza wars in Michigan in the 1950s.
Right up your alley. Okay, let's start with Donald Trump's criminal trial in New York City. Yesterday, a newsworthy day in the nearly 3-week-old trial with former adult film actress Stormy Daniels herself taking the stand. She testified for hours, putting her face to face with the former president. This case, again, is about whether Trump made these hush money payments to the adult film star and also another woman, Karen McDougal, so that they would be quiet about alleged affairs that happened years earlier. Trump is charged with mislabeling business records to hide those payments before the 2016 election. On Tuesday, Daniels gave explicit testimony about an alleged sexual encounter with Trump back in 2006 in Lake Tahoe. She says she met him for dinner after meeting at a golf outing, and she says that their sexual encounter left her, quote, shaking. Trump's legal team, meanwhile, asked for a mistrial after her testimony. They say that she has changed her story numerous times. Trump's attorney saying a lot of the testimony this witness talked about today is way different than the story that she was peddling in 2016. The judge, though, Juan Merchan, ultimately denying the Trump team a mistrial.
Yeah, he says it's basically up to the jury here to decide the veracity, the trustworthiness of the two sides and the various witnesses. This brief sexual encounter is at the heart of this trial, right? Because the allegation is that Trump falsified business records to conceal the payment to Daniels to buy her silence for not telling this story publicly. The payment came during a critical moment in his presidential campaign. The argument here from the prosecution is that ultimately Trump did this to change the election, leading to this not only be a misdemeanor in terms of paperwork, but a felony crime on a federal level. For prosecutors, putting Daniels on the stand here is a gamble. Her testimony does help bolster the account of her former lawyer, who gave jurors a firsthand look at the negotiations into buying her silence. But then again, you have the accusations here that she's changed her story over time. And there are questions about that certainly will come up as this trial continues. During the testimony, I should note, she said that she blacked out during the encounter, but then clarified that she was not drunk or drugged. So that's something certainly Trump's attorneys will bring up here now that her testimony stands. The Trump side saying that the testimony here was meant to inflame the jury, wrongfully raise questions about whether the sex was consensual, which is not at issue in this case. We should note, of course, Trump has denied the affair, denied the wrongdoing, despite the allegations here from Daniels that go back now more than a decade. There are no cameras in the courtroom, but reporters there described the jurors as riveted as Daniels gave this testimony, gave the account of their interactions. Now, Trump's lawyer, during cross-examination, tried to poke some holes in Daniels' credibility. In one exchange, the lawyer asked, "You've been making money by claiming you had sex with Donald Trump for more than a decade, correct?" Daniels agreed. She wrote a book that described the sexual encounter from back in 2006. The lawyer following up, "You say you had sex with President Trump, right?" Daniels agreeing. The lawyer then saying again, "And that story has made you a lot of money, right?" So clearly here, the defense trying to poke holes in her story, saying it's all for money here, that this is not actually truth, but she's trying to make money off the whole thing. Remember, she's an adult film actress. Her former attorney was Michael Avenatti. And so again, risky here for the prosecution to put her on the stand. And it's going to be an issue they're going to face when they put Michael Cohen on the stand. Former Trump attorney Michael Cohen, who was involved in this, has admitted to lying. And so what the defense is going to try to do here is poke some holes, because remember, this is a criminal trial and they have to prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. So what is the defense trying to do? Create doubt around Michael Cohen, create enough doubt around Stormy Daniels, saying even if you think it happened, is it beyond a reasonable doubt? And so one of the issues as this unfolds here, so the prosecution is still presenting their case, and at some point when they close their case, that's when Donald Trump's side will begin to make their case.
So, Moshe, you mentioned that there's no cameras in the courtroom, which makes it a little bit challenging to follow this, because you're pretty much just relying on a handful of reporters that are in there. She seemed to be getting some mixed reviews. Apparently, she had some jokes that did not land at all and were a little bit cringy.
Yeah.
She seemed really nervous. Apparently, she was talking really fast.
Right. So, they keep telling her to slow down.
Yes. So you make a good point. It's not clear if this is going to help or hurt. And it was a risky move to put her on the stand here.
Because remember, this case is not about whether they had sex. This case is not even about the hush money that he paid. This case is about the fact that he lied about what the hush money was about to try to change an election. But again, here the prosecution is trying to, put out all their cards that they think are in their favor. But the core of the case, whether you believe the affair or not, again, all these other allegations, it's about him manipulating legal documents. And so that was the argument from the Trump attorneys, being like, what is the purpose of all of this? This is going to taint the jury in a certain way. And it appears here, at least, upon initial glimpse, that this maybe could have backfired. Again, too soon to tell. We can't talk to the jury here. We weren't in the courtroom, but certainly a risky move here. And the trial will continue.
Okay, now to some tech news. News that we were expecting. TikTok and its parent company ByteDance have now sued the federal government over that law that we've been talking about that forces its Chinese owner ByteDance to sell TikTok or be banned in the United States. It is expected that this case will end up at the Supreme Court.
Eventually, I should say, Joe, sometime next year, or it could even be 2026.
Yeah, this petition was filed in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit. If you remember, Congress passed this TikTok bill because of national security concerns about TikTok's ties to the Chinese government. President Biden signed the bill into law as part of a massive aid package to foreign countries. Now, TikTok's argument here is that this law violates the First Amendment. and the free speech rights of millions of Americans who use the app to communicate and share their views. It also says that ByteDance, the Chinese-owned company, divesting from TikTok is, quote, simply not possible, especially given the timeline, which is 270 days. Reading from that 67-page petition now, quote, for the first time in history, Congress has enacted a law that subjects a single named speech platform to a permanent nationwide ban and bars every American from participating in a unique online community with more than 1 billion people worldwide. There is no question the act will force a shutdown of TikTok by January 19th, 2025. And Moshe, the other big part of the lawsuit, TikTok says the government simply hasn't proved that the app is actually a national security risk.
Yeah, they've been saying that the U.S. government has been speaking in generalities here. A lot of the concern has been shared behind closed doors by the FBI, by intelligence officials, to members of Congress. You can imagine now that there's a legal case that the government is going to have to figure out what they can share in a court of law about why they are so concerned about the fact that ByteDance owns TikTok and China's involvement, alleged involvement in ByteDance and their ability to manipulate the American population, their ability to take our information, etc. TikTok making the argument here also that the law shuts down the platform based on, quote, speculative and analytically flawed concerns about data security and content manipulation. We should note, though, that TikTok is a Singapore, US-based company owned by ByteDance. TikTok officials aren't privy to everything that ByteDance is privy to, and that's an argument the American government is making, is like, TikTok, you can complain all you want, but like, you don't even know everything that's going on between ByteDance, your parent company, and the Chinese government. So TikTok saying Congress itself has offered nothing to suggest that TikTok opposes the types of risks to data security, foreign propaganda that justify this act. But again, behind closed doors, and officially the Office of the Director of National Intelligence says China has used TikTok to influence U.S. elections going back to 2022. They say that this is a major concern. The Justice Department is not officially commenting on this lawsuit. Again, this is widely expected here. But it is clear that ByteDance has no intent to sell TikTok, especially in this 9-month to 1-year time frame that Congress has given them. The Chinese government has said it firmly opposes a forced sale. They don't want to export TikTok's algorithm. They say this is incredibly complex given the global nature of TikTok. And so what's going to happen here? Federal courts are going to listen to two arguments. One from the U.S. government saying this is a national security concern. The other from TikTok saying this is a free speech issue. And they will have to determine national security versus free speech. It'll go up, and by then we might have a new president, right? It might be former President Trump, now new President Trump, who says he doesn't want to ban TikTok. How will that factor in here? Question mark. You can also imagine at some point they might freeze this law from going into effect, which would freeze the 1-year timeline here. So that's something to think about as well. So a lot of question marks as we go through the process here. But like we told you when they first passed this law, you're probably not going to see a resolution here into next year, or again, potentially 2026.
Yeah, Moshe, it is a complicated issue, particularly in an election year, and there could be some blowback here, especially from young people. There are about 170 million Americans who use the app every single month, including many who use it as part of their job or a way to make a living. And as you mentioned, interestingly, Trump now says he is against the ban, even though he was really the one who was pushing for it when he was president.
Yeah, there are questions as to why he feels the way he does. Some say it might be because one of his biggest new donors is a major owner of ByteDance. Additionally, he's also said that his new enemy is Meta, is Mark Zuckerberg. And he says that they are a bigger problem for the American people than TikTok. Despite TikTok's foreign ownership, he has animosity towards Meta because, of course, they were one of the platforms that took him off after January 6th. So a lot of complex politics here. National security issues, free speech issues. And so this is going to be an incredibly interesting story to watch on multiple levels.
Time for the speed read, starting with the latest in the Middle East. From the Associated Press, Israeli troops seized control of Gaza's vital Rafah border crossing on Tuesday. The White House describes it as a limited operation as fears mount of a full-scale invasion of the southern city. There are about 1.3 million Palestinians in that area, many of whom have been displaced from other parts of the Gaza Strip. Israel ordered about 100,000 to evacuate. So many were seen packing up tents. Where they're going is not exactly clear. President Biden has repeatedly warned against a full-scale operation on humanitarian grounds. John Kirby saying that Israel has described this as an operation of limited scale and duration that's aimed at cutting off Hamas arms smuggling. The UN is also warning of a potential collapse of the flow of aid to Palestinians from the closure of Rafah and another main crossing into Gaza, Kerem Shalom. And Egypt has also previously warned that any seizure of Rafah, which is supposed to be part of a demilitarized border zone, or any type of attack that would force Palestinians to flee into Egypt. They say that would threaten the 1979 peace treaty with Israel that has been a linchpin for regional security. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu calls the capture of the crossing an important step toward dismantling Hamas's military and governing capabilities. And the defense minister, Yoav Gallant, saying that Israel would deepen the Rafah operation if the talks on the hostage deal fail.
Yeah, right now it does not look like a full-on invasion. It looks like a limited operation to take that border crossing. They're very concerned about the fact that weapons are smuggled through that border. It's actually one of the reasons the Egyptians put up border closure on Rafah for years. They've had their own blockade on Gaza for years. Due to concerns about Hamas, weapons smuggling, etc. So this Rafah junction, basically the last part of Gaza, the Israelis don't control this go-around. Their concern is this is the last part of where Hamas has battalions. But again, just a limited operation here. Some of this might be being done for domestic optics in Israel, where the majority of the Israeli people want to see that Hamas is being taken out. So Israel trying to thread a needle here between Western criticism and trying to create some pressure on Hamas to actually agree to their version of the ceasefire agreement. And that's something we told you about yesterday, that effectively Hamas accepted its own deal yesterday, making an announcement about a deal that the Israelis hadn't seen. So basically a counter proposal, not a deal, even though it was announced as such. Still, negotiations continue. The U.S. expressing optimism, as the U.S. does, about a deal. The Qataris, Egyptians as well. We're optimistic, we're optimistic, we're optimistic.
Moshe, I laugh, but it's like, where are they getting cautious optimism? They've been
optimistic
for years.
You know where they're getting it from?
For months.
You know where they're getting it from? Joe Biden has an election in 6 months, and he needs this war to end yesterday because he wants it in the rearview mirror so he can focus on domestic issues again. So the more optimism they express publicly, the more they see that in headlines, the more people read those headlines and they're like, oh, everything's coming to an end here. Let's move on. So again, we've been telling you there's an actual war, there's a PR war, everyone has agendas here. Everyone has goals of convincing people a certain way, one or another, and we try our best here to cut through all of it. So
we read between the lines so you don't have to.
I'm trying to, Jill. I'm trying to. This is a mess and a half. And so ultimately here, you have a lot of complex constituencies because you also have the Israeli hostage families who are not a unified bloc either. Some of them say, do whatever it takes Israel to cut a deal here. We don't care if Hamas survives another day. Then you have hostage families who are like, no, actually, I want to see my family home, but I also want to see Hamas destroyed. Then you have everyone else in Israel, the vast majority of which say Hamas needs to be destroyed. We can never see October 7th again. Hamas promises 1 million more October 7th. So please get it done. Do not end this war until they are done here. And so the Israeli government trying to navigate all of that domestically, internationally here. But some frustrated that there was no deal, that they're not going far enough. Some frustrated that they're going too far. And as far as the deal here, the difference is some nuances here, but effectively Hamas changing the deal to say they don't have to release living hostages. Some of the hostages they return could be corpses. That's something the Israelis oppose. Also, a key thing here, as we've told you, Hamas wants the war to completely end altogether. The Israelis say, we will not end the war until you're gone. Hamas wants to survive another day. The Israelis don't want them to survive. And so the nuance here, the language will have to be figured out. And then you have everybody else, which is like, please end this thing at some point. And then you have Israel trying to exert pressure by going in to Rafah, sort of, kind of, a bit so far. So that's where we're at as of this Wednesday.
And sticking kind of to the Middle East here, from Axios, campus protests have been dominating headlines and social media, but some new data shows that only about 1 in 10 students view it as a top issue. 8% of college students have participated on either side of pro-Palestine or pro-Israel protests. This is according to a Generation Lab survey. It comes as over 2,000 people have been arrested on a couple dozen campuses across the country. So what do students actually care about? Students ranked the conflict in the Middle East as the least important issue facing them out of 9 options. Most important, healthcare reform, education funding, economic opportunity, civil rights, and climate change.
Yeah, and then you have gun control, immigration, national security, and then finally the Middle East. So that was out of those options, those 9 options. Jill, we told you about a survey in the last couple of days. Out of 16 options that listed the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as 15th out of 16th place. And so just an indication, again, as we always tell you here, that social media is not reality. Sometimes the loudest voices in the room are just that, the loudest voices in the room. This survey digs a little deeper into how students feel about this. All 2/3 of students disapprove of occupying campus buildings. Over half say refusing a university's order to disperse is unacceptable. 90% said that blocking pro-Israel students from parts of campus, which we've seen at UCLA, Harvard, and some other campuses, is unacceptable. 80% saying if protesters destroyed property, vandalize, or illegally occupied buildings, they should be held accountable. Though you do see when it comes to the encampment, specifically when they ask that question, 45% of students say that they support them either a bit or strongly, 30% neutral, only a quarter strongly or a bit opposed. As far as the situation in Gaza, when you ask college students, a third blame Hamas, 20% blame the Israeli prime minister, 12% blame the Israeli people, and 12% blame Joe Biden. And then when it comes to the community and engaging sides that oppose to you, 58% of those who support the protests against Israel said they would not befriend a pro-Israel protester. So that's 6 out of 10 pro-Palestinian protesters say they would not befriend a pro-Israel person. Meanwhile, 64%, 2/3 of those who participated in a pro-Israel protest, said they would still be friends with someone who marched against Israel. So interesting numbers there.
Isn't it sad, Moshe? I mean, not to be like kids these days, but to not be able to be friends with somebody who has differing political opinion views. Just feels really sad to me.
Yeah, we were talking about how you go to college campus to engage in ideas that you might disagree with. You go to see a diverse student body of diverse opinions, and you might come away disagreeing with each other, but it doesn't mean you need to not engage with one another. But more and more we're seeing this, sadly.
From NPR, Boy Scouts are changing their name after being embroiled in a sex abuse scandal. Starting early next year, the 114-year-old organization known as BSA, or Boy Scouts of America, will be rebranding as Scouting America. The president of the organization, Roger Crone, says the name change is part of an evolution as the organization seeks to ensure that everyone feels welcome. He says, "We are an organization for all. It is time our name reflects that." He says scouting under the name Scouting America will enable us to chart a course towards continued growth, relevance, and impact.
So there's been a lot of things in flux over at Boy Scouts for America for a while now. Back 5 years ago, they first opened their program to girls after allowing LGBTQ youth back in 2013 and gay scout leaders in 2015. So a lot of change here over the last decade. They emerged from bankruptcy last year after facing more than 82,000 lawsuits from people sexually assaulted by scout leaders when they were kids. Apparently, they were keeping a secret list of accused predators going back 100 years, but they didn't share the information with local chapters. This was the national organization. So suspected sexual predators were able to go from troop to troop. Last year, they established a $2.4 billion fund to settle all the claims related to sex abuse victims.
From NBC News, Panera says that the restaurant chain will be phasing out its charged lemonade, a highly caffeinated beverage that has been blamed for at least 2 deaths in lawsuits. The beverages prompted controversy in October following a lawsuit filed by the family of 21-year-old Sarah Katz. She was a University of Pennsylvania student with a heart condition who died after consuming charged lemonade. And then there was a second lawsuit filed in December by a man in Florida with a chromosomal deficiency disorder and a developmental delay. He also died after drinking charged lemonade. A third lawsuit was filed in January by a 28-year-old Rhode Island woman, which claimed the beverage left her with permanent cardiac injuries. A spokesperson for Panera said Tuesday that the nationwide discontinuation of charged lemonade comes after a recent menu transformation. They'll be focusing more on what guests want, ranging from exciting on-trend flavors to low sugar and low caffeine options.
Yeah, so they had previously advertised this as Panera. We told you about this a few months ago. It's charged lemonade as a plant-based and clean with as much caffeine as our dark roast coffee. But the lawsuits here claim that their large, 30 ounces, had 390 milligrams of caffeine. That's, Jill, about 4 or 5 coffees worth. So you can imagine in some cases, people are going up to the fountain soda and getting a refill of this, meaning upwards of a dozen, potentially cups of coffee if you get a refill on the large. According to the FDA, healthy adults can generally safely consume about 400 milligrams of caffeine. Again, about the amount in one large, about 4 or 5 coffees. So ultimately here, Panera deciding it's not worth keeping on the menu amid all the legal issues, etc. So charged lemonade, goodbye.
And finally, from CBS News, Noelia Voigt, who was crowned Miss USA in 2023, unexpectedly stepped down on Monday and posted a message to social media urging people to prioritize their mental health. In that Instagram post, the former Miss Utah said it was a tough decision. She said she knew that her resignation might come as a shock to many people, but that she strongly values making decisions that feel best for you and your mental health. She said, quote, "Deep down, I know this is just the beginning of a new chapter for me, and my hope is that I continue to inspire others to remain steadfast, prioritize your mental health, advocate for yourself and others by using your voice."
So apparently she surprised the pageant world, I'm told, Jill, with this announcement. But it does come during Mental Health Awareness Month. And she joins a growing list here of performers, celebrities, athletes who have cited mental health issues as a cause for stepping away, at least temporarily, from their careers. We told you about tennis player Naomi Osaka, singer Shawn Mendes, who canceled part of a tour recently due to being overwhelmed and overstimulated. Actor Kit Harington, who took time off after having mental health difficulties near the end of Game of Thrones. Simone Biles and Gabby Douglas. Ben Simmons of the Brooklyn Nets. Tom Holland, the actor from Spider-Man, who all of them at various points have said they need to take a break here. As far as Miss USA is concerned, Jill, they have a succession plan. The first runner-up was Miss Hawaii, and it looks like she'll be the new Miss USA. All right, now time for On This Day in History. We begin on this day in 1877. The Westminster Kennel Club Dog Show began. It was called the first annual New York Bench Show of Dogs, attracted a large crowd back then, as it does today. And it is one of the oldest continuously running sports events in the U.S., second only to, well, we had it this past weekend, the Kentucky Derby. All right, on this day in pizza history, in 1959, the first Little Caesars opened up in Garden City, Michigan. Jill, this time period, in the late 50s, huge for pizza openings. You had 1958 Pizza Hut. In 1959, you had Little Caesars. In 1960, you had Domino's. And if you're interested in pizza history, it's a fascinating history, especially the war between Domino's and Pizza Hut, the idea of delivery or no delivery. There is a great podcast called Business Wars that dives into the history of pizza in America, how it took off, etc. So check out Business Wars Pizza Edition if you're interested in nerding out on pizza history.
What people don't know, Moshe, is that if this news thing does not work out for you, your dream is to really produce like 10-part Netflix series about all of these business wars.
I love corporate history. I think it's so fascinating. As you may know, I recently traveled to Procter & Gamble in Ohio, and I have a history of Tide and detergent and Ivory soap, and it's just so interesting, I think, at least. You can check that out over on the Instagram highlights over on the Mo.news account. All right, on this date in 1984, the Soviet Union announced it would be boycotting the Summer Olympic Games in LA that summer. It was basically a reaction to the U.S. 4 years previous to that, boycotting the games in Moscow due to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. So the Soviet Union decided to return the favor and boycott the games in LA 4 years later. Jill, an important moment in TV comedy history on this date in 1993. Motivational speaker Matt Foley, you might remember him as the man who lives in a van down by the river, played by Chris Farley, made his first appearance on Saturday Night Live. Speaking of SNL history, on this day in 2010, Betty White, at age 88, became the oldest person to host SNL. And a bit of music history as we end here. The Beatles released their 12th and final studio album, Let It Be. It came a month after Paul McCartney actually announced he was leaving the Beatles. And on this date, same day, 1970, over in Michigan, the home of Motown, the Jackson 5 released their second studio album, ABC.
May 8th, 1970, a great day for music.
Let It Be, ABC. Jill, 54 years later, we're still listening to them.
All right. Thank you for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It really does help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
See you guys tomorrow, everybody.